Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics, Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Bryan Heminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAoddsbreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by 5Dimes and Countermove, your home for fantasy MMA. I'm Bryan Heminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts oddsmaker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC 186 pay-per-view event, which takes place in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. If you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will be breaking down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Then, fight scientist Reed Kuhn will step in and offer his expansive numerical insight on all bouts with sufficient data. Today, Reed will be able to contribute on 4 total bouts. Briefly looking back at our last event, our premium package bets for UFC on Fox 15 went 2-2 to win 0.9 units overall. We won our bets on underdogs Max Holloway and Aubin St. Preux, but lost our underdog bets on Jimmy Hedges and George Sullivan. We also won our 1-unit free bet on a parlay that included top prospects Aljamain Sterling and Beneil Dariush. Back to the present, UFC 186 features a 12-fight card in total and will be aired on UFC Fight Pass, Fox Sports 1, and pay-per-view this Saturday night. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking off the preliminary card on Fight Pass is a women's strawweight bout featuring Aisling Daly, who is 15-5, and Randa Markos, who is 4-2. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Markos minus 300, the comeback on Daly plus 220, and right now it's Markos minus 260, the comeback on Daly is plus 220. So basically, line margins tighten up a little bit. By the way, all lines are courtesy of our sponsor, 5dimes.eu, so check those guys out. So a little bit of two-way action coming in, but more support early on has come in on Daly. But again, margins have tightened up. So there's not a ton of action on this fight. I think there's a lot of split opinions out there, and the line should stay steady for right now. I do believe that Markos has some advantages in this fight. I mean, Daly's been around for a long time. I got a ton of respect for her. She's been a true veteran of the game. She's a former Cage Warriors veteran. She's fought in Invicta and fought on some decent local shows as well. So Daly definitely deserves to be in this spot in the UFC. Markos, on the other hand, is a little bit less well known in some aspects. I mean, I know obviously she did such a good job on the Ultimate Fighter show, so maybe some of the newer fans and some of the people that have checked her out from the show are aware of her capabilities and how good she is. But compared to Daly, she's not as much of a veteran, obviously, in the sport. So she's a little bit fresher. That being said, I think it's a good matchup, but I think it's a matchup that Markos can control. I think the biggest threat to Markos in this fight is actually Daly's submission game. Daly's a pretty well-rounded fighter. Her stand-up's not bad, but it's not really that threatening. What you do have to fear in Daly is how smooth her transitions on the ground are. I mean, she has really good BJJ. She threatens. I mean, her armbar submissions are really fun to watch and fun to look at for sure, the way she goes about everything. Now, Markos, on the other hand, I think she's going to have a stand-up edge. Even though Daly might have a little bit more experience standing, I think Markos is making some serious strides. I think her stand-up, she's got a little bit more power on the feet, and I think she's going to be a little bit more aggressive on the feet as well. So I think Markos does have a slight stand-up edge. Now, it is going to be pretty competitive and close, but I do see her having that edge. And I do think that Markos has the wrestling edge in this spot as well. So I think she's going to be able to dictate and control the tempo of this fight. So if she wants to keep the fight standing, I think Markos is going to be successful doing so, and she'll probably outpoint Daly on the feet. If she wants to take the fight to the ground, I think she's going to be capable of doing that as well. Now, it is going to be playing into Daly's hands a little bit because Daly is such a good submission artist, but I think Markos is game enough that she's going to be able to avoid the submissions more than likely. And if she's able to do that, she wins the fight, because I do see Markos by decision being the way this fight plays out. So, interesting fight. It should be very competitive back and forth, but I do give a lot of the advantages to Markos in this spot. If she doesn't get subs, she should really win.
The main problem with Daly is, while she does have a very good ground game, she does not have very good takedown defense. You saw it in her last fight against Alex Chambers, where Chambers was able to quickly get her to the canvas. You saw it all the way back when she was fighting in the Bellator 115-pound women's tournament, when Lisa Ellis was able to get her to the canvas. So Daly has consistently had issues with her defensive wrestling throughout her entire career. Now, she does have good submissions. She has good arm bars. She armbarred Alex Chambers in her last fight, her UFC debut. She even submitted Jessica Ai at 125 pounds back in the day. So she does have a dangerous ground game, and that is something that Markos needs to watch out for, because while Markos is very strong, she has good offensive grappling, she does have a tendency to put herself in a couple bad spots. I mean, you saw it in the Rose Namajunas fight where Rose was able to submit her with a Kimura. So if Daly's able to latch onto an armbar from bottom, she might be able to finish it. I think that is Daly's best path to victory here. On the feet, I think this will be relatively even. Markos isn't anything really special on the feet. She moves forward pretty well. She's aggressive. It helps her close the distance and then get the fight to the canvas where she wants it. But Daly is a decent brawler on the feet. But again, she likes to brawl and throw some strikes to close the distance and try to get the fight to the ground in her own right, because she would prefer to be on top position. Although I don't see her taking down Markos. So even though Markos is stepping in on relatively short notice, I mean, she's been training her butt off, waiting for an opportunity to get to fight again, and she's going to be ready. And she's had plenty of extra time since this fight did get pushed back a little bit instead of taking place in Europe. And I expect Markos to come in here crazy motivated, fighting in her home country, and really, I think she's going to put Aisling Daly on her back and keep her there for the majority of the fight. So my pick is Randa Markos. Now, sticking with the women's strawweight division, we have Jessica Rakoczy, who is 1-4, taking on Valerie Letourneau, who is 6-3. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Open Letourneau minus 215, the comeback on Rakoczy plus 165. And right now, looking over at the line at 5 dimes, it's Letourneau minus 175, the comeback on Rakoczy is plus 155. So 10-cent move on the dog. Line margins have tightened up again in this spot. And I think this is an interesting fight for sure, because Rakoczy, if you just look at her record, I mean, I think on ShareDog she's listed like 1-4 or something like that. She's definitely better than that record indicates, no doubt about it. I mean, she's got the boxing background. She's very talented on the feet. She's got a little bit of length to go along with it too. So I think Rakoczy, she's been working on her overall MMA game, and she's been making some serious strides. Making it to the finals of the Ultimate Fighter, that's impressive enough, obviously, as well. So she is better than her record indicates, but make no mistake, Rakoczy, the best part of her game is definitely her hands and her striking aspect. So I think that's what she's going to look to do. She's going to look to sprawl and brawl here, and try to basically beat Letourneau up on the feet. It's going to be tough because Letourneau, I think, is a pretty versatile striker overall. I think obviously Rakoczy has the pure boxing edge, but Letourneau is just the better, overall MMA striker in this spot as well. She mixes things up, even with her kicks, everything. Her clinch work is pretty good as well. But Letourneau's advantages, I mean, she does like to stand and bang a lot, so that's the kind of game she plays out as well. But I think her real advantage in this fight is going to be on the ground. Rakoczy is getting better. Her takedown defense is improving as well, but she's still a little bit weak on the ground. And I think Letourneau, even though she's not really well known for her grappling, she has enough grappling, especially with training at the likes of TriStar, now American Top Team as well. She's going to be a little bit more skilled, and she's going to have a good game plan coming in. She knows that the way to beat Rakoczy, to make it life a little bit easier at least, is getting her to the floor and trying to dominate her there. So I think that's probably what we're going to see, Letourneau going for takedowns and trying to get Rakoczy on her back, and possibly even looking for subs and some ground and pound and control at least. On the feet, it's going to be competitive and close, but I think most of the advantages do lie for Letourneau. Now, the interesting note here is both ladies are dropping down to 115 for the first time, so we'll have to see how they look at weigh-ins. But I think this is a fairly close matchup, but I do give the advantage to Letourneau, so I think she's going to probably come away with a win here.
Letourneau is more well-rounded than Rakoczy. Rakoczy is older. She did do better on The Ultimate Fighter. Letourneau actually didn't advance past the opening bouts to get onto the show, but she did face a tougher opponent, and Rakoczy basically is a bit one-dimensional. She's pretty much a pure boxer with a little bit of a kicking game. And Letourneau on the feet isn't half bad. She's active, she's technical, and she's faced really good competition throughout her career, even her losses. And in terms of the ground game, I do think that if Letourneau gets it to the canvas, she should be able to be holding the top position and maybe even submit Rakoczy. You saw that Rakoczy did not defend the ground well at all once Juliana Pena got on top of her. Now, something interesting, both girls are dropping down to the 115-pound division for the first time. Their previous fights were at 135, so this kind of reminds me of the Albu versus Beduric fight from a few weeks ago where both girls were cutting all the way down. I don't think it'll be a huge problem for either girl. Neither of them were big at 135, and I think it'll especially be easy for Letourneau, who has consistently competed below 135 already, just not all the way down. But overall, I do think Letourneau's younger. I think she's more game. She showed a lot of toughness in that fight against Elizabeth Phillips in her UFC debut, where she got hit with a big shot to the eye early, which opened up a bad cut, and she just fought through it and won the last 2 rounds and took the fight. And I think that she could do the exact same thing here, is weather that early storm from Rakoczy and then just cruise through to victory. I think she is just the better overall, more well-rounded fighter. She trains at a better gym, and she's going to be well more prepared. So I think the move to American Top Team is actually going to be a big boost for her with a lot of the really talented ladies that are over there as well. So my pick for this fight is Valerie Letourneau. Now moving up to the welterweight division, we have Nordine Taleb, who is 10-2, taking on Chris Clements, who is 12-5 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Taleb minus 215, the comeback on Clements, plus 165, and right now it's minus 260 for Taleb. Clements is plus 220. So more support has come in on Taleb. He is getting more action overall, and I think it probably will continue for at least a short time. I'm expecting eventual dog action to come in on Clements, especially as the line gets up there a little bit more. This is actually a very intriguing fight. I know Clements is one guy that's not going to get a ton of respect out there, especially, again, amongst the newbies or more of the guys that are just coming into the sport. I think Taleb is the kind of guy that watching him a couple times on The Ultimate Fighter, of course, and there's a little bit more hype and buzz around him, and he's definitely a little bit more popular overall amongst the MMA fans out there. So I think that Clements is probably getting a little bit too much disrespect early on here, because he's definitely a dangerous fighter. I mean, Clements, what he does best is striking. The guy is an excellent kickboxer. He's got a ton of knockout power. I mean, obviously, you can look at his last fight against Horiguchi, and he was able to finish him pretty quick there as well in the first round. So that's the kind of knockout power and the kind of striker he really could be. Now, the problem is he is getting up there in age. He's 39 years old. So you don't know when Clements is really going to hit that decline spot. And of course, he hasn't been the most consistent fighter. I mean, he's taking fights that are spread out a little bit. He's only had 2 fights, I believe, since 2013. So that's not really what you like to see. But that being said, Clements is still good at what he does best, and that's striking and knocking people out. He's going to have to avoid the takedowns here and basically sprawl and brawl a little bit with Taleb, because that's exactly what Taleb's going to look to do. Taleb is a more well-rounded fighter, no doubt about it. He's got a pretty decent skill set. He could strike with him, but he's not going to want to strike with Clements, because again, I think Clements is going to have the advantage definitely on the feet here. But Taleb does have a little bit of knockout power in his own right. His hands aren't bad. But he's pretty much a grinder. I mean, he's going to look for some takedowns, look to control the fight on the floor. And once he gets the fight to the floor, he has pretty good ground and pound as well. At least that should be his game plan against Clements here. That's his path to victory, I think. But it's not a real confident selection. I am going to go with Taleb, but I'm not overconfident, because I think he could get caught and knocked out along the way, because I think Clements' takedown defense will give him some problems, at least early on. But I think Clements, as far as cardio goes, I give the slight edge to Taleb, so Clements is going to fade as the fight goes on. So if Clements doesn't get him out there early, I think he will probably start fading and end up losing a decision to Taleb as well. So I'm going to slightly lean towards Taleb in this spot, but I do think it's another dog or pass situation, because Clements is the far more dangerous striker, and he's capable of winning this fight by knockout. This is the type of fight that after staff picks and after weigh-ins, I could change my mind possibly, but for right now, I'm going to lean towards Taleb, because he is the more complete fighter. Obviously training at TriStar. There's a bunch of TriStar fighters on this card as well. I think they're all going to be game. They're all going to be ready to go. So you got to give some slight advantages towards Taleb.
And while I completely agree with your reasoning, I'm going to actually use your reasoning to pick Clements. Taleb is the more well-rounded guy. Taleb does have a little bit better cardio, but Taleb is also not very good with his striking defense. He has some issues with his ability to finish opponents. He's actually had some pretty ugly performances so far in both of his UFC fights. They really haven't been very entertaining. They've been kind of a grinding point fighting fest. And I think if Clements comes out there and is aggressive and just tries to knock his head off, he can get a first round finish. Now, I don't expect Clements to get a finish if this fight goes past about the first 7.5 minutes, but I think in that first 7.5 minutes, there's a chance that he could go out there and do it. Clements is older, 39 years old, but he showed his knockout power in his last fight against Vic Grujic, where he absolutely blistered his opponent quickly. So, if Taleb is sloppy with his defense, if he doesn't take Clements seriously enough, I think there's a very good chance that Clements comes out here and puts him on his keister and finishes the fight. So, Taleb is going to need to close the distance, try to avoid Clements' strengths, which is his punching power, and maybe even get this fight to the ground. And then eventually, once Clements is tired, he can just start outpointing him on the feet as well. But I think Clements is going to be very dangerous early, and Nordine Taleb, while he is well-rounded, he is not that great at any particular skill, and I think Clements is going to be able to exploit that. So, my pick is Chris Clements. Now, kicking off the Fox Sports 1 prelims, we have a lightweight contest between Olivier Aubin-Mercier, who is 5-1, taking on David Michaud, who is 8-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I open Aubin-Mercier minus 380, the comeback on Michaud, plus 260. And right now it's Aubin-Mercier minus 350, plus 290. So line margins again tighten up a little bit. And two-way action coming in, nothing significant either way here. So the line seems to be holding steady. I mean, looking at how these guys match up, they're interesting because they have a lot of similarities, no doubt about it. Michaud likes to take the fight to the ground. He's got decent striking overall, but he's a kind of grinder as well. Likes to play on the ground a little bit and is capable of beating a lot of fighters. I think he's training at a good camp with MMA Lab. He's got a pretty nice win over Whiteley in his, last fight as well. So he's got some confidence, some momentum coming in, to this fight. And again, I mean, he's a pretty well-rounded fighter. And he can really, if it stays standing, he can strike with you. If it goes to the ground, he can grapple with you as well. But that's the problem here against, Aubin-Mercier. I think Aubin-Mercier is one of these guys. He's talented. Both these guys are young, by the way. So they're always going to be able to make some pretty significant improvements, as their career, moves forward. So both of them are 26 years old. But I think the high side for out of these two is definitely more towards Aubin-Mercier. I think he's got more of an upside for sure. I think the guy, because of his grappling ability on the ground, I mean, the guy is definitely a special type of grappler, no doubt about it. And the crazy thing is, I mean, his striking is definitely getting better as well. He's becoming more aggressive. He's basically starting to, again, mentally be a little bit more prepared and more ready, because he doesn't have as many fights as Michaud, but it's pretty close as far as actual, overall fights on the resume. But Aubin-Mercier, I think, is the kind of guy that will continue to improve even more so than Michaud. I think, again, on this fight, if it stays standing, I do give the slight edge to Aubin-Mercier here as well, because I think he's going to be a little bit more aggressive. He's going to have a little bit more pure power on the feet as well. But make no mistake, Mercier is going to try to get this fight to the floor and do what he does best. And that's, again, grind people out, submit people as well. He looks to take your back. And I mean, it's hard to survive underground with a guy like Aubin-Mercier. So, I do have to lean towards him. I think that, he's more times than not, this is a very winnable fight because Michaud kind of plays into his hands stylistically. And I think Aubin-Mercier is basically just a little bit better everywhere, but especially on the ground, he has a significant edge. And I think that's where the fight's going to play out the most. So both these guys, again, young, training with great camps. Aubin-Mercier training with TriStar, another one of these guys that's on TriStar. So I think that it is going to be a competitive battle, but Aubin-Mercier, it's going to show how much better he is as the fight moves forward and he starts controlling things, especially on the ground. He could possibly finish Michaud as well. So more ways to win this fight, and I think I'd be pretty surprised if Aubin-Mercier does not win this fight. So my official pick is going to be on Mercier here.
Michaud is scrappy. He showed it in both of his UFC fights so far, especially his last one. But this is a huge step up in competition. Garrett Whiteley is probably not even a quarter as good as Aubin-Mercier, and he's not nearly as young and promising of a prospect. Mercier has terrific wrestling. He's showcasing improving striking, and he's definitely putting in the time and getting a great environment to round out his game at the TriStar gym in Canada. The guy is just one of those prospects that you got to keep an eye on for sure. And Michaud is just not that. He's a guy that, he's educated, he's smart, he knows what he's doing in there, but the skills just don't back up his heart. And while he does have good heart, he goes out there and he competes. I think that he's going to have a lot of trouble against Mercier. On the feet, maybe he can turn this into a slugfest and make it interesting. But I think the second this fight goes to the ground, Mercier is going to be in complete control. He'll be getting top position, passing guard. Michaud just does not have the ground skills, even though he does like to get top position on the ground. Like, he's just nowhere near as good as Mercier is on the canvas. And I think that this fight's going to be going there in a hurry. That's where Mercier loves to go. He has good ground and pound. I mean, they called him the next GSP on Tough Nations. That was definitely overstating things, but this guy is a really talented young prospect with a very bright future. And I think that David Michaud is pretty much just a stepping stone at this point. So they're definitely building Mercier up slowly. And I think you're going to see Mercier look really, really good here. I would not be surprised if he gets a finish, but he might just win a very convincing decision as well. So my pick is Aubin-Mercier. Now, sticking with the lightweight division, we have Chad Laprise, who is 10-0, taking on Bryan Barberena, who is 10-2. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Laprise minus 350, the comeback on Barberena plus 250, and right now it's actually minus 325 plus 265. So another spot where the line margin just tightened up a little bit and two-way action has come in, so nothing significant here at the sports books. I do think this is Laprise's fight to win or lose. I have a lot of respect again for Barberena because, man, he's one of these guys that's just a warrior. He's an aggressive fighter that keeps on getting better. He's also young. He's 25 years old, training at a good camp. But there's several, I was just mentioning the TriStar guys on here. There's several MMA lab guys on this fight card as well. So that doesn't hurt, I think, training with several fighters that have the same vision, the same goals. So Barberena is going to definitely be prepared for this fight. And he, again, tough as nails. He's got a lot of knockout power on the feet. He's a guy that's just relentless. You can hit him with shots. He just keeps coming forward. His aggression is very hard to deal with at times for a lot of fighters. But one bad part about Barberena is I think his strike defense is a bit concerning. He eats too many punches. Even in his last fight against Ellenberger, he was getting tagged by Ellenberger quite a bit. Now, he was tough enough to take them and absorb those and still got the W there, which was very impressive for sure. But that being said, Laprise is on another level. I mean, Laprise's striking, I think, is just a thing of beauty to watch, really. He mixes things up well. He can outpoint you. He's got a little bit of knockout power to go along with it. His takedown defense, as shown, I mean, since the Ultimate Fighter especially, is right there where it's going to be tough for Barberena to get inside and get Laprise to the ground. So if it stays on the feet, I think there's such an edge for Laprise as far as technical skill set and being able to just land on Barberena that Laprise is going to be able to land at will. Now, Barberena does have some power, of course, and he is a southpaw, so it's going to make things a little bit interesting, but I still think that Laprise should be able to use his footwork, use his movement, and just basically pick apart Barberena on the feet. And landing so many punches, I think he's going to have actually some potential to finish Barberena as well. Now, Barberena is a tough guy, hard to finish, but I think Laprise is almost due for a highlight reel type of knockout, and he might get it here. But that being said, I'm expecting Laprise to honestly be just a little bit too much for Barberena here. I think Barberena is going to have to be aggressive and look for some takedowns and look to hold Laprise up against a cage, but I don't see him having a ton of success because he's going to get picked apart while doing so. So I think, like we were just talking about Aubin-Mercier, I think Laprise is a legit Canadian prospect. Well, he's 28 years old now, Ultimate Fighter winner, and deservingly so. That was pretty impressive performance as well. And again, training at TriStar is only going to help his career that much more. So I think that Laprise is going to continue to take some big strides, and he's going to be one to watch at 155 for sure. So my official pick is going to be Laprise.
Barberena did impress me in his UFC debut against Ellenberger. He showed some good toughness, some really solid overall conditioning, and he actually weathered that early storm, ate a couple big shots from Joe Ellenberger, and then just turned the tides. The second Ellenberger started to fade, he just punished him and then got a late stoppage, and deservedly so. So I was very impressed that he was able to overcome some of that adversity early and then just get out there and take care of business. But this is a completely different animal in Chad Laprise. Laprise is a monster, in my opinion. I think he's another really bright up-and-coming prospect. I think he's even better than Mercier, obviously, because he beat him to win the Ultimate Fighter. But also, he's just way more well-rounded. He's a dangerous striker. He's good on the ground. He has good submissions. He's just one of those five-tool type of guys. And I think that he's really starting to come into his own. He showcased some of hints of his potential in his last fight against Yevgeny Cedeno, who is a very dangerous guy in his own right. Laprise was able to just outwork him in all facets. He landed twice as many strikes, landed 4 takedowns, just completely neutralized his opponent. I think he could do the same thing here against Barberena. And honestly, I think this is a bit of a step down if you really want to go look into it. Cedeno is more dangerous than Barberena. He doesn't train as good of a gym, but he is more athletic. So I think Laprise is going to be able to outwork Barberena on the feet. Laprise is going to be able to get takedowns if he wants them. And I think Laprise is going to have the submission advantage on the ground. Really, the only spot that Barberena has a chance is if he's somehow able to keep this fight in the clinch for the majority of the fight, because he does have really good Muay Thai skills on the inside. He has good knees and elbows. He could do some damage there, but I really don't expect Laprise to play right into his opponent's biggest strength. He's smarter than that. He trains at a gym where they will probably plan 100% of their game around avoiding that situation. Firas Zahabi's a really intelligent game planner. I'm sure that they're ready for that. So I really expect Laprise to completely dominate this fight, and I'm not surprised at all why he's such a big favorite. So my pick is Chad Laprise. Now dropping down to the women's bantamweight division, we have Sarah Kaufman, who is 17-2, taking on Alexis Davis, who is 16-6. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Kaufman minus 245, the comeback on Davis plus 175, and right now, line has been bet down a little bit. It's Kaufman minus 190, the comeback on Davis is plus 165. So line margins basically tighten up a little bit with a little bit more action coming in on Alexis Davis. And I understand, I mean, these girls have had wars. Obviously, this is the trilogy here. And it's always an entertaining fight, no doubt about it, especially last one. Davis made a late comeback there and it definitely made things interesting. So Davis is a warrior. She's well-rounded. As far as skill set goes, I mean, Davis, I think, is the more well-rounded fighter, complete MMA fighter. Her stand-up skill continues to improve. Of course, she's got pretty good ground game. I mean, her submissions are nasty on the ground. She's very smart as far as fight IQ goes. She has good cardio. She's just very solid everywhere. But you could say a lot of the same things with Kaufman. I mean, her ground game is not on the level of Davis's, but I do think her stand-up is a little bit better. She's a technical striker. She's got a little bit of power to go along with that. She's a very smart, intelligent fighter on the feet. She keeps a very high pace. And she's got pretty solid takedown defense. So I know Davis was able to get it to the mat, the last fight, and that's what made things a little bit interesting because, Kaufman had to basically survive there. And to not get finished by Davis. But that being said, I think that Kaufman is very game. She's an intelligent enough fighter that she knows what she needs to work on. She knows she needs to keep this fight upright. And if she does, even though Davis will be game and it'll be competitive, I still think that Kaufman can outpoint Davis. If not, maybe possibly get a stoppage. I don't think it's going to end. I think the fight does hit the scorecards, but Kaufman's that good, and I think she should win at least 2 out of 3 rounds clear on the judges' cards. In my opinion, she'll probably win all 3 rounds if she doesn't get herself in a bad spot on the ground. So I think this is a clear unanimous decision type of fight for Kaufman, with all due respect to Alexis Davis. But I do think that Kaufman, right behind Ronda Rousey, it's hard to argue that Kaufman's really not the best in that weight class. I mean, she's right up there, and she's been up there for a long time, and she's that much of a quality fighter. So I think Kaufman continues to move up the ladder and towards a title shot.
History is probably going to repeat itself. They fought twice before. Kaufman won the first 2 times. And really the only thing that Alexis Davis has done to win any round in either of their fights was in the 3rd round of the rematch, where she was able to get a takedown and was able to have a dominant position on the ground, although Kaufman survived it. So I think unless Alexis Davis is able to drag this fight to the ground and secure a dominant position and either finish it or do this twice at least out of the 3 rounds, I don't really see how Alexis Davis wins. Sarah Kaufman has really refined her striking a little bit. She's much more technical instead of just trying to brawl. So she pushes forward. She throws a lot of straight punches. She throws short combinations. And then when she does close the distance, she throws good knees. She mixes in some nice dirty boxing. She's just a very complete stand-up fighter. She's not the quickest. She's not the most explosive athlete, but she has good power. She sits down on her strikes, and she makes it work. Alexis Davis has some decent Muay Thai skills on the feet, but they really aren't anything that really scares Sarah Kaufman. Kaufman ate plenty of shots from Davis in their last fight and walked right through him and just kept pounding Alexis Davis with some really heavy shots. So I'm really not worried at all about Alexis Davis on the feet here. The only thing is if Alexis Davis can drag this fight to the ground. Both girls are crazy motivated because they've been pretty inactive in their UFC careers so far, especially Kaufman. So I think Kaufman steps it up and might even finish Alexis Davis on the feet. So my pick is Sarah Kaufman. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, they agree. Granted, we haven't seen them very active lately, but there is Strikeforce data, and we do have enough sample size to show that Sarah Kaufman's hands are clearly better. She is a faster-paced striker, much more accurate. She has good defense, avoiding strikes. So per exchange, she's really getting the better of opponents on their feet. Whereas Davis, for whatever striking background she does have, she is willing to eat far too many punches just to deliver a few. So on the feet, clearly I think this favors Kaufman. I think she runs away with the rounds as long as it's standing. Now, Kaufman is not going to be trying for takedown. She, I think, literally only has one takedown attempt in her career that we have measured, whereas Davis is much more frequently trying to get the fight to the ground. Sarah Kaufman, her takedown defense is 73%. It's actually very good. Although most of the time on the ground, she has been controlled, but that reflects the fact that she doesn't really try to take the fight to the ground, whereas Davis does. So I don't think Davis should want to stand with Kaufman. She has tasted that before. She should know she's a little bit outgunned there. So if she tries to get it to the ground, that's going to be where the battle is. This is going to be a striker versus grappler position battle. If Davis can get it there, maybe she takes some rounds, but I think she has trouble. I think she gets punished on the feet. She's going to be overreaching for the takedowns, and Kaufman probably wins, 2 out of 3 at least of the rounds. It's not a super confident pick, but I do see enough on paper to support Kaufman as the favorite.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now this brings us to the main event of the preliminary card, where we have 2 veterans in the welterweight division, as Patrick Cote, who is 20-9, takes on Joe Riggs, who is 40-15. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Cote minus 190, the comeback on Riggs plus 150, and right now it's Cote minus 195, the comeback on Riggs is plus 168. So again, line margin's kind of tightened. There is a little bit more action coming out of Cote at the sports books as well. For me, it's a very, very tough fight, honestly. I mean, both these guys have been around for such a long time. They've had great careers overall. Some letdowns and disappointments. I think that a guy like Riggs, for example, I think that there were more expectations along the way in his career. I mean, he was a very talented young fighter that was pretty much well-rounded and always improving. He just didn't, I think, live up to his potential in some ways. But now he's kind of had a resurgence in his career. I think he's training a lot better. He's taking everything a lot more serious. I think that Riggs, as far as skill set goes, this is the best version of Joe Riggs that we've seen to date. Unfortunately, he is getting a little bit older, and in fight years, I mean, he's beyond his age. I can't believe, honestly, that he's only 32 years old. That's a little bit surprising. But again, fight years, he's beyond that. So he's had a lot of injuries. In his last fight, obviously, as well, with Saunders, that was kind of flukish, but he did injure himself with that takedown. And those are the kind of things that have kind of set Riggs back throughout his career. Just he's a little bit fragile in some ways, but at the same time, skill set, he's got it all, and he's improving for sure, no doubt about it. So his matchup with Cote, I think these guys are going to want to stand and bang a little bit, especially Cote. I know Cote's another one of these guys that has really improved. He's been around the sport for a long time. I think he's kind of overachieved in a lot of ways, but at the same time, he made it all the way to a title shot, which is impressive. But as far as being almost a gatekeeper in the UFC, he's done a fairly good job. I think he can definitely win some fights, and he can continue to win some fights, honestly. But again, another case where he is getting older. He's 35 years old now. So I'm not sure how much time that either of these guys really have left as far as their careers go. But that being said, Cote has been on a little roll again. He's won, I believe, 3 out of his last 4. So you got to respect that. But I do think that Cote is in that spot. His chin is getting a little bit more suspect, in my opinion. He's always had a very solid chin, always been a very intelligent fighter, a good striker all around, with decent takedown defense, and his wrestling is now improving. But he's getting tagged more in fights, so his defense isn't what it used to be, and his chin is a little bit weaker as well. So that's a scary thing for sure. And as far as the matchup with Riggs goes overall, I think Cote's wrestling has improved, but I do give the slight advantage to wrestling still goes towards Riggs. I think that Riggs can probably get the fight to the ground a little bit easier than Cote can in this matchup, and do a little bit of damage on the ground as well. He can control that end of it, but I think Cote is going to be a hard guy to take down. I think his takedown defense overall is pretty solid. And again, most of this fight will probably stay upright on the feet. And if that's the case, I think Cote's striking and his fight IQ overall, and his conditioning, everything is going to come into play. It is in Canada, so I'm sure that that's not going to hurt Cote if it hits the scorecards as well. But this one, I don't know. I mean, either one of these guys can honestly stop each other. I've been going back and forth as far as a pick goes, because it is that competitive, but I do give the slight edge to Cote because, again, I think that even though Riggs has the wrestling advantage, Cote will probably keep it upright and outpoint Riggs to a decision, especially in Canada. So I think that's what happens, but I wouldn't be surprised if either one of these guys catch each other along the way, or if Riggs pulls off the upset win here. So it's not a very confident pick in Cote, but I am going to slightly lean that way. As far as betting goes, though, I think the betting is a dog or pass situation. I wouldn't lay juice on either one of these guys at this point in their careers, so I do think it's a dog or pass situation.
Part of me is a bit concerned about both guys. I mean, they're both getting pretty late in the stages of their career. Cote is the older fighter at 35 years old, but Joe Riggs has taken much more wear and tear throughout his career. He is much more injury prone, as you saw in that last fight against Ben Saunders. Although Cote, he's a guy that relied so heavily on that iron chin, being able to wade forward and having some really good power with his striking. And it is not nearly as good as it used to be. I mean, you saw in the Sakara fight where he won by disqualification, but I mean, he got hurt bad in that fight. So before dropping down to the welterweight division. And it's not like he's gone out and just convincingly destroyed everyone since dropping down either. The Bobby Volker fight was a very close one. He got a bit of a hometown division in that welterweight debut. His best performance was actually against Kyle Noke in that Tough Nations finale, where he was actually able to out-wrestle Noke, which surprised me. I thought Noke had the better ground game of the two, but Cote was able to get inside, take him down, and then land some pretty good strikes on the feet. So it kind of came back to bite him against a better striker with decent takedown defense than Stephen Thompson in his last fight, but I don't think Joe Riggs is anywhere even close to Stephen Thompson. Riggs is kind of scrappy on the feet, nothing special, but where he's best is definitely when he's able to get his opponents to the ground, get on top, either work them over with wrestling or start going for some submissions. Riggs definitely should have a ground advantage here, even with the improvements in Cote's wrestling. But again, how much can you trust Joe Riggs? So a big part of me thinks that if Cote can keep this fight standing, he can land some good shots, even though he's not the most explosive striker. And if he's able to just outlast Joe Riggs, he might be able to just put him away late too, because Riggs cut so much weight to make the welterweight limit, and after putting his body through so much throughout his career, I think that he takes a lot out of himself to drop down to 170. So I'm going to lean Cote. I'm not crazy confident about it, but I think the veteran can pull this off, especially fighting in front of his hometown crowd. All right, now Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, again, there's a lot of volatility here. Both guys have been in and out of the UFC, and Joe Riggs, he only really made his return for a few minutes and then was injured. He injured himself on a takedown. So the stats here are kind of old, but they do show, at least his tendency, is that he really does like to go for takedowns and try to work ground and pound. So stylistically, that could be something we should expect to see. We also note that Patrick Cote is much larger in terms of reach. He has a 5-inch reach advantage. So Riggs might be coming in a little bit outgunned on the feet in terms of range, and then trying to get in close to get the fight to the ground. You mentioned Joe Riggs' age, how surprising it is that he's 32 years old. But look at his knockdown defense. He's been dropped 5 times in the data that we have for a knockdown rate that is horrible. Not even close to the UFC averages for any division. So while he has normal head strike defense, it only took a few shots to drop him. And that's a big red flag. The fact that he was getting dropped that easily at a young age, because this data again is from his 20s, not from his 30s. So, there's a lot of durability issues with Joe Riggs. He definitely has had a lifestyle that's been up and down, and that introduces a lot of problems with brain health. So just very fragile situation with these two, lots of unknowns. It's hard to pick confidently. I would certainly lean Patrick Cote as the more durable guy here. In theory, should do well against a guy like Joe Riggs. But I mean, more importantly, I think maybe if these guys really do go at it and get aggressive, it's just, someone's going to get finished. Someone's going to get clipped, because Cote is not invincible himself. We've seen him get wobbled and dropped easily too. So just a lot of volatility on this one. I would be very careful about trying to play too specific a pick here. Although overall, I guess if forced to pick, I would have to go with Cote.
Now, kicking off the main card of the pay-per-view, we have a bantamweight contest between Yves Jabouin, who is 20-9, taking on Thomas Almeida, who is 17-0. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Up in Almeida, minus 505 to come back on Jabouin, plus 335, and the line has dropped a little bit. Almeida is now minus 450, Jabouin is plus 360. So a little bit more support coming in on the dog. Obviously, Yves deserves some respect here in this spot. I mean, he's always been slightly underrated. I mean, the guy has a really solid skill set, of course, highlighted by his striking. I mean, the guy is really another guy that's really fun to watch. I mean, he mixes things up well. He's got a lot of power on the feet too, capable of knocking you out. But the impressive things about Jabouin, especially lately, is his wrestling is getting a lot better too. That was a very impressive performance over Easton. You got to give him a lot of credit, and he needed to kind of bounce back because coming off that knockout loss to Weinman, and then his age factor again. He's 35 years old, so I think he needed to stay relevant, and that was a huge win for him. So much respect for Jabouin, really, because he's a very talented fighter, but he's facing a beast in Almeida. I mean, no question about it. This kid, there was a lot of hype coming into the UFC for his debut. A lot of people were expecting Almeida to be this serious prospect. I mean, he's only 23 years old, and he's another outstanding guy to watch fight, especially striking on the feet, no doubt about it. So there was a ton of hype about him, and the UFC actually didn't give him an easy fight for his debut. He fought a pretty tough guy in Gorman, a guy that's going to challenge at least what we thought would be Almeida's weaknesses, which would be the ground game and getting out wrestled and getting grinded out by these strong wrestlers coming into this. So we needed to see basically Almeida's takedown defense and how he perform against somebody that's going to look and be relentless at getting those takedowns. And Almeida, I mean, his takedown defense overall was very impressive. He managed to scramble back up when he needed to, and then on the feet, he's just, I mean, tremendous. The beating that Gorman took, a lot of people would have been out. A lot of people wouldn't have had the heart to survive as long as he did. And again, I think it just showed us the overall skill set of Almeida. I mean, he's definitely legit. He's definitely a solid prospect. And with his skill set against Jabouin, especially right now at this stage of his career, it's not a good fight for Yves. That's why I opened it as high as I did. I really expect Almeida to obviously keep this fight upright, and outstrike Jabouin, which is a very, very talented striker. But I think Almeida is just that much better, especially, like I said, at this stage in their career. I think Almeida is just going to be too much. His offense is going to be too much for Jabouin to handle. And I think what's going to happen is we're going to see Almeida win this fight more than likely by knockout. So unfortunately for Yves, his momentum is going to stop right there. And Almeida is going to continue to, the hype around him is going to continue to increase a little bit. And he's going to be an eventual title contender, no doubt about it, I think. I mean, the 135 division's open enough for him to make a run towards that title. And I think he's going to be a threat to a lot of people. So my official pick is going to be Almeida. I think the guy is a serious prospect and looking forward to watching him fight.
And I completely agree that Almeida is a beast. Looking at this fight, the big statistic that jumps off the page is the age difference. Jabouin is 35 years old compared to Almeida's 23. So while Jabouin does get a little bit of extra experience, Almeida's already got 17 fights under his belt. So I think that he's going to come in here fully prepared. Jabouin has had better strength of opposition, but Almeida did prove that he can handle, a tough, gritty guy like Timmy Gorman in his UFC debut, a guy that was trying to close the distance, trying to take him down. The only thing that really scares me about Almeida is his striking defense. It's not great. He doesn't really move his head a lot, and Timmy Gorman was actually able to land several jabs and actually busted up Almeida's eye a little bit in that fight. So against a more seasoned striker in Yves Jabouin, he's going to have to be a little more careful and not so reckless with his striking defense, because Almeida is an absolute buzzsaw in terms of his pure offense. Like, he moves forward, he throws combinations effortlessly, and he is so dangerous. He mixes in punches, elbows, knees, low kicks, the occasional body and high kick, and I think that he could knock Yves Jabouin out with anything. One of Almeida's favorite strikes is to drop that left hook down to the body. I think that's something that could do some serious damage to Jabouin as well, because he'll be so focused on defending his head, because Jabouin doesn't have a great chin. As you saw, he got knocked out badly by Brad Pickett. He's also been hurt badly by Mark Hominick in the past, and he's getting up there in age, and as we all know, as you get older, your chin starts to wear down. So I think this is a picture-perfect spot for Thomas Almeida to come in and get a statement win in the UFC bantamweight division. He's going to have to be a little bit careful, because Jabouin's ground game used to be a liability, but he's gotten much better with it. He's actually been able to secure some top position against opponents and scramble better, so he's been putting in the time in his ground game. And Almeida has to take that seriously, because he's more of a defensive ground fighter than anything. So he wants to just stuff takedowns, get back to his feet if put down, and then get back to just hammering away at his opponents on the feet. Jabouin is also an unorthodox striker at times. He mixes up some spinning attacks that will come at you for some weird angles. So Almeida's also going to have to be careful about that. I think Almeida's chin is fine. It definitely did get tested in that UFC debut, but the big thing here is, if these guys are trading strike for strike at any point, I think it's Jabouin that's going to be going down, and Almeida is a justified heavy favorite because of that. Almeida is so solid offensively. He does have some things he needs to work on, but I don't think Yves Jabouin is going to be the guy that exploits those weaknesses, especially at his age. So my pick is Thomas Almeida. Now, moving up to a bit of a tricky fight with a 160-pound catchweight, we have John Makdessi, who is 12-3, taking on Shane Campbell, who is 11-2. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Makdessi minus 185, Campbell plus 145. That was my opener. And right now over 5 dimes, Makdessi minus 175, Campbell's plus 155. So another spot where really line margins have tightened up. There's not a lot of crazy action coming in either way here for this fight, because it is a tricky one. Definitely an interesting fight. Makdessi I have a ton of respect for, but the guy is a very talented striker. I think technically speaking, he's got a little bit of power. He's smart. He's elusive. There's a lot of things to like about his striking, no doubt about it. He has had some problems with some longer fighters, though. I mean, last fight with Alan Patrick, of course, it was a controversial decision, but Patrick's aggression, what the judges liked in that fight, I guess, a little bit more so. And then back in the day, a couple years back against Njokwani, he also lost a competitive decision there as well. So length has given him a problem in the past, and Campbell's a type of fighter that is definitely going to have some reach advantage and a little bit of length over Makdessi. So that's going to be an interesting scenario. But technically speaking, Makdessi is a very, very skilled fighter, and this matchup is awesome because Campbell likes to stand and bang as well. I mean, Campbell, obviously, first of all, he's an MFC and WSOF vet, so he's got some solid experience outside of the UFC amongst those organizations. He's a former K1 kickboxer as well. He's fought K1 Max, so he's got high-level kickboxing experience, a Muay Thai stylist overall. So there's a lot of great things to like about Campbell because he's not going to be overwhelmed by Makdessi's striking, no doubt about it. He's been in the ring with some really good fighters, really good strikers as well. The question mark here about Campbell, though, he is replacing Trujillo, so he is coming into this fight on short notice. That's why it's a catchweight fight at 160 here. And cardio is a little bit concerning with Campbell. He does tend to slow down at times a little bit, and especially with this fight being on short notice, so that is a concern. But overall, I think Campbell is just a hard guy to deal with. I mean, he's so aggressive on the feet. He's so powerful. He mixes things up well. He's got a really good clinch game. I think what people are probably going to underestimate here in this spot is Campbell actually, his ability to take the fight to the floor is not bad. When he gets in close, he's able to kind of trip you down to the ground as well and get top position. A lot of people usually try to get Campbell on his back, and they have had some success in the past by doing so, but Makdessi is not going to be one of those guys. So I don't think Campbell has to worry about getting taken down and sprawl and brawl at all in this spot here. Both of them are going to be willing to stand and bag, and I think if anything, Campbell's going to look actually take Makdessi down at times. But going back to Campbell here, one concerning thing, his strike defense isn't the greatest. You would think it would be a little bit better considering he's been in the ring with some really good strikers throughout his career. But it is a bit concerning. I think Makdessi's defense is a little bit better, and Makdessi, again, being such a good striker, that Campbell could get in some problems even if it does stay up, which Campbell's going to probably want to stay in a bang with Makdessi as well. So it's going to be an interesting fight. It's one of those fights that I could see it honestly ending either way early, because both these guys are so talented. Striking is going to be hard to take some punishment either way from these guys. It's another tough one for me. I've been kind of going back and forth on this one as well. I'm going to give the slight lean towards Makdessi. Dog or pass situation, but my official pick right now is going to be Makdessi. I think this is going to be one of the best fights of the night, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, this fight might be the one I'm most looking forward to on the entire card. I think it actually got better with the injury replacement of Shane Campbell. Campbell is a very, very dangerous striker. He has heavy hands. He has that really good Muay Thai kickboxing background. And he does have some experience against some pretty good overall fighters. So I don't expect him to come in here and be intimidated by John Makdessi whatsoever. He's also going to be the longer, taller fighter. So if he's able to use some of that reach, he might actually do some damage on the feet. I think in terms of pure one-punch power, he's probably the more dangerous power puncher too. So there's a lot of things to like about Shane Campbell. The things I don't like, obviously, are the short notice replacement. He's not getting a lot of time to come in here and face probably the best striking opponent he's ever faced. His defense, as Nick mentioned, is a liability. He can get hit pretty easily, and John Makdessi is a very accurate, very technical striker and a very dangerous striker. So I would not be surprised to see John Makdessi be able to get in, land some good strikes, and get out of the way, and just be the first guy to land blows. And that usually always is a bit of an advantage, especially if you're not a counter striker. Now, in terms of the ground game, I think that's a bit of a wash. Makdessi's takedown defense has gotten a lot better. It looked really good in his last fight against Alan Patrick, where he lost a very controversial decision. He stuffed just about every takedown Patrick threw at him. And I think Patrick's takedowns are better than Shane Campbell's. And Campbell really isn't a great ground fighter. He has a bit of a submission game, but I don't expect it to be too much of a factor here unless he somehow hurts Makdessi on the feet and then tries to finish him with a submission on the ground. Now, sticking with the feet, I think Makdessi did something that could play a big factor in this fight. During the year and about 2 or 3 months that he took off, he kind of reprioritized everything with his MMA career. He got some eye surgery. I don't know if you've ever seen some pictures of Makdessi. He always has the one eye looking off in another direction. He actually got that fixed. It's been something that bothered him since he was a little kid. I think that's going to be a big psychological benefit to him. In terms of his confidence in the cage. It also could be a bit of a detriment depending if he gets punched in the eye, as you've seen guys like Michael Bisping, Josh Koscheck coming off of scary eye injuries, even Alan Belcher. They are a little defensive about that eye. I mean, that's a really important part of the human body, so he might be a little overprotective of the eye as well if Campbell starts landing a good jab around that socket. So that is something to keep an eye on, pun intended. Now, I'm going to side with John Makdessi mainly because of the UFC experience and his much better striking defense. But I would not be surprised one bit if Shane Campbell comes in here and makes a bit of a splash, especially because of the cage rust that Makdessi's been experiencing, having not fought in about 14, 15 months. Now moving up to the middleweight division, we have Michael Bisping, who is 25-7, taking on CB Dollaway, who is 15-6. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Bisping -185, the comeback on Dollaway +145. Line has since dropped. It is now -140 for Bisping, and the comeback is +120 on Dollaway. So a little bit more action coming in on Dollaway. The sportsbooks are getting bet back on Bisping. Line staying a little bit lower overall, and across the board, looking at the Don Best screen, it does look like it's about 140, 150 out there for Bisping. So slight favorite for Michael Bisping, and I can understand. I think the line's fair where it is right now as well. I was actually expecting the line to get probably bet up a little bit more because there just doesn't seem to be a lot of love for Dollaway out there. He doesn't get as much as respect as a guy that like Bisping. I know that people could talk smack about Michael Bisping, but overall, he's definitely proved that he's, a top-level fighter. How close has he got to that title shot? Unfortunately for him, he just hasn't got it, but Bisping's still a class act, and he's been a great fighter. And especially in the middleweight division throughout his career. So, that respect, though, from some bettors out there, he's not getting. People are betting Dollaway, and I can understand why. Stylistically, this is an interesting matchup. A lot of people are going to say Bisping's takedown defense should be good enough to basically neutralize Dollaway, keep the fight upright, and Bisping is the better striker. I agree with that in some ways. I just don't know how they're really going to match up until they get in the cage and with Dollaway's wrestling. I think Dollaway is a very underrated wrestler. His grappling is definitely ahead of Bisping's as well. Offensively, his submission skill is really off the charts. It's very underrated. I think Dollaway's a sneaky good sub-artist in a lot of ways. He only has 3 submission wins. I understand that, but still, I think the guy's a little bit better than that indicates as well. But his control and his IQ on the ground, honestly, is not too bad. Now, defensively, he's got some problems with the sub game, of course, but Bisping's not that type of fighter that's going to sub him. So, on the ground, a big advantage to Dollaway, but the fact is, can he get it there? I think he really can. I think that Dollaway can mix it up enough on the feet that he can basically use his striking to close the gap a little bit, bully Bisping around, and possibly get some takedowns along the way. And if he does, obviously, then it's going to be a big advantage to Dollaway. I think he'll be able to grind a guy like Bisping out. Now, there is some concerns, though, because Dollaway doesn't have the best cardio at times. It's a little bit spotty. That's definitely an area you got to be a little bit concerned with. But I think he has shown recently that his cardio is improving. I think his chin has lasted a little bit. That's always been a problem for Dollaway as well. His strike defense isn't that great, and he's definitely type of guy that you can knock out because of that, and his chin's not the greatest. But that being said, Bisping doesn't have a ton of power. He's a little bit underrated on the feet. I think that, especially in the UFC, he hasn't won a lot of fights by knockout, but Bisping can definitely win this fight by knockout, no doubt about that. And again, Bisping, I think, is overall the more technical striker as well. So this is really going to come down to can Dollaway get the fight to the floor? And if so, he's probably going to win the fight. If not, Bisping's probably going to outpoint Dollaway, if not knock him out as well. Now, the wild card is on the feet. Dollaway does have a little bit of sneaky power. And Bisping, we're talking about chins. Bisping's chin, I don't really trust all that much. I know that, lately he's been taking some punishment, been getting rocked in his fights, but not getting put out really. So you got to give him credit for that. But at the same time, I just don't like it. We're talking about Dollaway's defense. Bisping's defense isn't the greatest. It is better than Dollaway's, I'll give him that, but there's still some flaws on Bisping's game. So I think this is kind of a toss-up type of fight, so I do understand the original action coming in on Dollaway a little bit because I do think it's a dog or pass situation overall. And I'm going to actually pick Dollaway to win this fight as well. I think he's getting a little bit underrated here, underestimated as well. And I think that the way he matches up with Bisping, he could probably control and win this fight if he doesn't get put out. So my official pick is going to be Dollaway.
And I'm actually going to agree. Michael Bisping is a dangerous fighter. He's been a stalwart of the middleweight division for quite a while now. But my problem with him is it looks like he is in a bit of a decline. Yeah, he beat Kung Lee, but you look at the fights before that, and he just has not been very impressive. Even his cardio let him down against Tim Kennedy. Now, against CB Dollaway, Bisping should still have a conditioning edge. Dollaway does start to fade a little bit as we get later into fights, although his conditioning has improved. And Bisping definitely should be the better overall pure striker. In open space, he lands with a higher volume. He has better movement. But again, CB Dollaway has improved that area. But Bisping has defeated better strikers than Dollaway in the past in pure striking matchups. So I don't expect CB to just want to keep this fight on the feet, although he is dangerous. Bisping has been known to get rocked and hurt in multiple fights. And CB does have some pretty dangerous power, as we've seen, where he dropped Carmont, knocked out Cesar Ferreira very easily. He is a guy that you have to respect in terms of that left hook when he's throwing it. CB has worked on his striking defense as well, especially after he was going through that real rough stretch where he was just getting knocked out on the feet by a lot of people. Now, what makes CB dangerous is that he can mix in some really good takedowns with the striking, especially now that he's started to round out his game a little bit. And I think Bisping could have some trouble with that if Dollaway is able to put pressure on him, make Bisping move backwards, put him in some bad spots, and then just dive in and dump him on his back. Yeah, Bisping might be able to get back to his feet, but I think CB can definitely make him work. Now, neither guy has a good chin. I would actually say Dollaway's is slightly worse, but Bisping's power is not even close to as much as Dollaway's. So, I mean, these guys are landing strike for strike. It's Bisping that's probably going to go down first. Although, Bisping probably is going to be landing 1.5 strikes for every one that Dollaway lands. In terms of ground game, Dollaway has really good top position. If he gets a takedown, he's probably going to keep Bisping down for a pretty good amount of time, even though Bisping's ground game is good. And you have to factor in that Michael Bisping is now 36 years old. I mean, you saw what happened with Lyoto Machida last week. He started to just get old overnight almost the second that Rockhold got him to the ground. He just was not the same fighter again. And that could happen if Dollaway gets him to the ground as well. So I'm actually going to go in there and also pick CB Dollaway to pull this off. I mean, unless Michael Bisping is able to really connect with something solid or outlast Dollaway and Dollaway gasses badly, I think CB can either win the first 2 rounds to win a decision or put Michael Bisping away with some heavy punches. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, they certainly agree with you that the grappling stats favor Dollaway. He gets a clean sweep actually on the stat line. So he attempts takedowns very frequently while he's on his feet. He's quick to go to ground. He's successful in landing those takedowns, above average takedown success. And overall, he's been in control on the mat. And more so in all of these metrics than Michael Bisping, who doesn't really use wrestling as an offensive weapon. But on the feet, it's the flip side. Michael Bisping is powerful, he's accurate, he's fast-paced, he's very elusive, and I think the biggest difference here is in the head strike defense. Bisping is crisp and technical, whereas Dollaway is a bit sloppy pushing forward. So Dollaway has been not only eating a lot of punches on the way in, probably trying to go after those takedown attempts, but he also gets dropped quite frequently. Now, over the career, Bisping has more knockdowns received than Dollaway, but they both have a lot, and on a per-strike basis, Dollaway's chin is as bad as you guys have suggested it is. It's way worse than average. So both these guys are actually vulnerable in terms of eating a hard punch. I just think Dollaway is going to be the one that's pushing forward in pursuit and is going to be more susceptible to getting clipped on the chin on the way in. Obviously, if he gets those takedowns, that's his best way to steal around. The cardio issue is probably the deciding factor for me. Bisping obviously has the advantages on the feet, Dollaway on the mat. What happens after round 1 if this really is the grinder? Dollaway's going to have to work hard not only to get Bisping down, but to keep him down. Bisping used to be very good at getting up. That may have changed. Maybe he is fading. Tim Kennedy got him mounted a few times. But Dollaway, it might be telegraphing a little bit too much because it's probably going to be clear what his game plan is here. And I do think that he might tire out. Maybe not in the first round, but probably the second. And I think after that point, Bisping may just have a field day with him being able to pick him apart on the way in and just, strike and fade. So I can see the path to victory here for Dollaway. I get what you guys are saying with the wrestling attack. That has been Bisping's weakness, and perhaps even more so lately. But Bisping is also used to facing bigger and better opponents. The wrestlers he's faced, like Rashad Evans and Kennedy and Chael Sonnen, Dan Henderson, they also had a decent amount of striking attack to mount and to set up their takedowns. And they also definitely had some cardio. Most of those guys did, at least. Tim Kennedy just abused him for 5 rounds because his cardio is famous. But Dollaway, I don't think is going to have that. Fortunately, this is a 3-round fight, and that's why I think this line stays very close. If this is a 5-rounder, I go Bisping all day. But 3 rounds, it's a close call. I'm personally going to go against the grain here. I think Bisping probably pulls it off. From a betting standpoint, I also think it's interesting that with 10 knockdowns received between them, that, there is some risk of someone getting caught, and it could be either one. Dollaway clipping Bisping isn't out of the question either. But he's also quite vulnerable. So someone getting wobbled and that setting up a finish wouldn't surprise me either. And given that the over-under here, 2.5 rounds, is steeply in favor of the over, nearly 2-to-1 value on the under. That's interesting to me as well. Perhaps instead of a straight up pick, because this is maybe harder to call on paper than we initially realized, given the name brand and recognition of these two fighters.
Now, this next bout has been very interesting. It is now a 215-pound catchweight fight between Quinton Rampage Jackson, who is 35-11, taking on Fabio Maldonado, who is 22-7. We originally already recorded Maldonado versus Steve Bosse because Rampage had an injunction put against him by Bellator, but literally within the last hour or so, the UFC announced that the injunction's over. Rampage is back on the fight card, so we have a whole new breakdown to do. So let's get right back into it. So Nick, where did you open this fight? How has everything shifted throughout the whole thing? And what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on it now?
Well, I opened Jackson minus 315. The comeback on Maldonado is plus 235. It is a fresh line, so currently there's not a lot of movement, lines holding steady at that spot. The previous line, though, I did open Jackson, the original matchup, before it got canceled off the 186 card, before it was replaced. He was replaced by Bosse. I opened it minus 305. It got bet up a little bit. So again, it's ballpark. It didn't get bet crazy. So I opened it near ballpark is where the first line did open and settle. The line margins were a little bit tighter. So you get Maldonado at a better dog price slightly. But Jackson was around the same price, around 315-ish or so. That being said, Maldonado is now going from a 2.5 to 1 favorite to a 3 to 1 underdog again, with Jackson replacing and coming back into the fight and Bosse being out. So it's a roller coaster ride, really. Mentally, it has to be for Maldonado, no doubt about it. And this is a catchweight fight at 215, as mentioned. So giving Jackson a little bit of leeway here, but supposedly he has been keeping up his training, and he's not going to be that far out of shape, so it shouldn't be much of a problem with Jackson. Even when he has missed weight in the past, I mean, look back at the Bader fight, he was actually game enough, and it might have impacted him slightly, but he was still strong enough to go 3 rounds in that fight. So I don't think cardio is going to be an issue with Rampage. His cardio has always been pretty solid. And as far as matchup goes, man, it's hard not to like Rampage in this fight, because Maldonado now, he goes from a guy with kind of questionable cardio, like he has been fighting recently, to a guy that's always, again, had pretty solid cardio. So Rampage isn't the type of guy that's going to fade as the fight goes on, and Maldonado's going to take over. I think Rampage has significant advantages in this fight. On the feet, he's got good boxing. Maldonado also has pretty good boxing. Of course, he's known for his striking. But I think Rampage can be a little bit more aggressive, push the pace a little bit more as well. He has more power in his punches, so Maldonado's going to have to be careful that way. So on the feet, I do give the slight edge to Rampage. I know Maldonado's going to be game, but if Rampage wants to get the fight to the floor, his wrestling's good enough where I think he could take Fabio down at will, control him, land some pretty heavy ground and pound along the way as well. So I just find it really hard to believe that Fabio's going to win this fight. I think it's Quinton's fight to win or lose definitely here, so he should be a solid favorite for a reason. I mean, if he does come into this fight out of shape or underestimates Fabio, then I think there's a slight chance that he could pull off the upset, but I don't think so. I think a game Rampage, which he wants to obviously be a part of this fight, he wants to come back to the UFC, is just too much for Maldonado to handle, honestly. So my official pick is a no-brainer, honestly. It's going to be Quinton Rampage Jackson.
And I agree with the Rampage choice. This fight is taking place at a catchweight now because of the short notice change, allowing Rampage back in. He doesn't have to cut an extra 10 pounds. That's a big benefit for Rampage and for Maldonado. He doesn't have to suck out as much while dropping down to instead of going all the way down to the light heavyweight limit. Now, I'm a little confused with how everything's been playing out. Who knows if Jackson's still been training this whole time, expecting the injunction to be lifted? So he could still be a bit rusty. We don't know for sure. That's just something that only people that are in the Jackson camp will know. But if you just go skill for skill, Rampage is very dangerous, and if he had one opponent in the UFC light heavyweight division that he wanted to return to the UFC against, it would be a guy like Fabio Maldonado. Rampage's biggest complaint in the UFC was that they kept throwing him in there against people that would take him down. Even Glover Teixeira took him down in his last UFC fight. So Fabio Maldonado, that is not going to happen. Maldonado is pretty much a straightforward boxer with a great chin, super tough, super durable, and he actually gets excited and fights better when he gets hurt, when he starts bleeding. So this is the type of opponent that Jackson dreams of. A guy that's actually going to stand and bang with him and make it a fight. And I think it's a very winnable fight for Quinton. He has really good technical boxing skills, nothing crazy. He has good power, and he could knock Maldonado out. We saw Maldonado's chin start to get tested a bit against guys like Stipe Miocic, who completely steamrolled him. So if Quinton lands something really good, he could definitely put Maldonado out. Now, who knows what Jackson's endurance looks like, but if he starts to slow down, Maldonado's conditioning is actually pretty good. He gets stronger as the fight goes on and wears down his opponents with punches, especially those body strikes. They definitely do damage as the fight wears on. So if this is a toe-to-toe standing battle, you gotta favor Rampage just because he has a few more tools. He could also take this fight to the ground if he really wants to, although that would be a bit hypocritical. You gotta think that Jackson still has enough left in the tank to beat someone that's a pretty much bottom of the barrel fringe top 15 light heavyweight in Fabio Maldonado. So my pick is Rampage. Now this brings us to the main event of the evening. We have a flyweight championship bout between champion Demetrious Johnson, who is 21-2-1, taking on Kyoji Horiguchi, who is 15-1. Now Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Demetrious Johnson minus 505, the comeback on Horiguchi, plus 335. And the line has since been bet up for sure. It's minus 1,000 right now for DJ, and Horiguchi's plus 650. So a lot of love and support coming in on Mighty Mouse, and I understand it. I mean, to me, honestly, it's hard to argue that he's not the best pound-for-pound fighter in the sport. I mean, Demetrious Johnson is such a well-rounded class act. I mean, just every aspect of the game, the guy is legit. He's tremendous. I mean, he's got good striking on the feet. He's got good speed to go along with it, good fight IQ, a good chin. Obviously his wrestling, I think, is the best probably at 125 because the way he goes about his takedowns, how fast he is, explosive he is. And he's underrated a little bit, I think, in the power department. I think the guy's pretty strong for 125 as well. And then once he has you on the floor, his jiu-jitsu is legit as well. So there's not many flaws at all in Demetrious Johnson's game. So I do understand why everybody's coming in and early on it was straight bets, and now everybody's parlaying DJ as well, because it's just hard to imagine Horiguchi coming up and pulling off this upset. I mean, Johnson seems to be the prototypical, perfect type of fighter, no doubt about it. So that being said, I do think that this is an interesting matchup, though, and I think that people are underestimating Horiguchi a little bit here. I know a lot of people are going to think I'm nuts by saying it, but I think this is one of the toughest fights Demetrious Johnson has had. Just the way Horiguchi goes about his striking. I mean, it's a karate-based striking game that he darts in and out. He uses a lot of good movement. It's very unorthodox, and it's hard to really catch a guy like that and predict or see some of those strikes coming at you. I think it's hard to defend against a guy like that as well. And Horiguchi definitely has some power to go along with it. Now, of course, I mean, Mighty Mouse has faced guys like Joseph Benavidez. He's faced John Dodson. He's faced some heavy hitters, no doubt about it, and he's been able to survive those guys. So it's likely he's able to survive Horiguchi as well, but I just think that unorthodox striking style of Horiguchi it's just going to be tough for Johnson to deal with it at times. So Johnson's definitely going to want to get this fight to the ground at some point, and then on the ground he's going to have a huge advantage. So I do think Johnson wins this fight, and it's probably going to be just by that. Eventually he's going to close the gap enough. He's going to tie Horiguchi up, get him to the ground, and once on the ground, I think that Johnson probably does submit Horiguchi. It might not even take that long. I mean, that's how smooth Johnson is on the ground. So I'm definitely going to pick Demetrious Johnson here. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer, and obviously he's such a high favorite. So, I mean, he should win this fight more times than not. But that being said, I think that there's a lot of disrespect, really, as far as not people respecting the skill set of Horiguchi overall. And I think that this is going to be a far more competitive fight than most of us think. And I think that, again, I'm going to throw some caution out there, which sounds crazy, but this reminds me a lot of Dillashaw Barao in their first meeting. Nobody really gave, I shouldn't say nobody, but far and few gave Dillashaw a shot at beating Barao. Everybody just said how complete Barao was, and regardless of the matchup, it's just a nightmare matchup for Dillashaw. People are saying the same thing about Horiguchi. The line got bet up in the same type of way. There's just a lot of similarities about that fight. So, cautious out there as far as how heavy you go on Johnson, because I do think Horiguchi, he might not be ready for this fight as of yet, but one day the guy's legit and he will be a real true contender. So I think he's going to give Mighty Mouse all he can handle right now, but again, I got to pick Mighty Mouse because Demetrious Johnson is just a class act, and he's just an awesome fighter overall. So hard to pick against the guy.
Demetrious Johnson, the well-roundedness of his game is what's going to help him win this one. Because in open space, Horiguchi is actually going to be a bit of a threat. He is pretty dangerous there. He's very quick, just as quick as Mighty Mouse, honestly, and he does have a bit of power. Not nearly as devastating of power as they're trying to let you believe in the promos, but he can hurt you. I mean, he hurt Daryl Montague in their fight. He knocked out John Delos Reyes, so he definitely does have the ability to finish a fight. I don't think he has the ability to finish Johnson, but he does have he can definitely sting him. Now, the problem with Horiguchi here is everywhere else, because in open space, he's dangerous. He has good footwork. He keeps his distance well. He can dart in and do some damage and get out of the way. But the second that Demetrious Johnson closes the distance, whether it be a takedown attempt and where he puts Horiguchi on his back, or if he can get this fight into the clinch where he has some marvelous dirty boxing elbows and knees, that's where Johnson's going to take over. I think Johnson does so many little things really well. Like, he might not be the most accurate striker on the roster, but he has good power. He steps in and out. He angles well. He's very, very elusive, and he might have the best transition ability in MMA, where he can just go from a stand-up exchange to ducking down and taking his opponent down at will and continue punishing his opponent in every area. There's a reason that he's near the top of the pound-for-pound list, and it's not just because he's been so convincing in his very impressive title defenses. It's because of how well-rounded his game is. There really are not any flaws overall in Demetrious Johnson's game, unless maybe there's somebody that's a little bit better and more dangerous of a stand-up striker. And I just don't think Horiguchi has the other parts of his game caught up enough that it's going to be as much of a factor. Horiguchi is dangerous. My problem is he's the type of guy that I think would have been a big threat to Johnson if they had given him another 2 fights first. But because the flyweight division is so roughshod right now, they had to put him in there a couple fights early. So I think Demetrious Johnson catching him early right like this is really beneficial to him. And at some point in this fight, Johnson is going to be able to close the distance and start punishing Horiguchi, because that ability to be elusive, that Machida-like ability that Horiguchi has, doesn't mean a lot when he's stuck on his back or he's stuck in the clinch. We saw that in the Machida fight last week. So I really do feel like Demetrious Johnson is going to play this smart, force Horiguchi to fight his fight, not play into Horiguchi's style, and he's really going to work him over. So Demetrious Johnson, in my opinion, is going to continue his reign of dominance in the flyweight division. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, it's funny. When I look at the stats, it's actually pretty even, but immediately looking at the record of the two guys, one thing jumps out, and that's just the lack of competition for Horiguchi. He hasn't faced any ranked opponents. So the fact that his striking stats show up very good, he has very high accuracy, on good pace. You know, he's outworking people, doing so very accurately, but also not getting hit. And that's a really great combination of factors right there. Demetrious Johnson doesn't look that good on paper, at least in terms of offensive stats. He's not as accurate, but he is very elusive, and that is something that people have always said about Mighty Mouse, is his speed. He's just really hard to catch, hard to pin down. So there is some give or take on the feet here. They're the same size. They're both in their 20s. No issues on the traditional tail to tape. But as even as that looks on paper, you got to remember Johnson was getting those stats against people like John Dodson and Ian McCall and Benavidez and even Dominic Cruz. 25 minutes spent with Dominic Cruz. A lot of that was actually on the mat. Dominic Cruz, obviously a dominant wrestler. And so even when I look at the grappling stats for Johnson, I think they're kind of depressed a little bit because he was competing with bigger guys for a while. So Horiguchi less tested on the ground. He only has 4 fights here. So this is a big step up. And I think really this was done more for having a fresh face to put against Johnson because he has wins over the entire top 4 right now. So I just think it's too much too soon. You're asking a guy to come out of the regional promotions, step in. Yes, he's looked good against low ranked competition, and then fight one of the most elusive, fastest guys in the entire UFC. That is a lot. So I can understand why there's some caution on the betting lines. 10-1 is a ridiculous amount to pay for Johnson. Here's a guy who just had a baby recently. He hasn't even probably gotten a decent night of sleep in a few weeks. Here he is. He has been dropped before. What if he's a little bit off? He gets caught early, and he gets knocked on his ass. That happened against John Dodson. He was able to recover, but you never know. So 10-1 is kind of beyond the threshold where a clash of heads on the way in, a hidden injury, anything like that could derail what you think is a sure winner. So I understand the caution that Nick is saying to have with the betting line here, but you can't pick against Johnson in this case. I'm just waiting for Johnson to either face John Dodson again or, Henry Cejudo, a couple guys coming up the ranks that are probably due for a title shot by the end of the year. Until then, I don't think anybody can really hang with Demetrious Johnson. He's made people look bad. He's capable of finishing a submission as late as the 5th round. So I think by 4th, 5th round, by then, Demetrious Johnson should be running away with this. He should be mixing in his wrestling effectively. He's been very, very smart in making adjustments, even if he does drop an early round. So I think one way or the other he gets this done. And I think, honestly, a late submission is probably where I'm leaning. And, why not make a small prop on that one? But as far as a straight up pick, you can't pick up against him, but you also can't pay that juice.
So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC 186. Part 2 of the Premium Oddscast featuring our premium bets will be out Friday about 2 hours after the weigh-ins. So stay tuned for that if you're an MMA Oddsbreaker premium member. If you'd like to become a premium member, just check out our homepage at MMAOddsbreaker.com and you can sign up on the top right side. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB Premium on Twitter because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsbreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Also, feel free to like our Premium Oddscast Facebook page. We post articles, show announcements, and plenty of other information there so you can stay up to date on everything from us if you're interested. Special thanks to our sponsors 5 Dime Sportsbook and Countermove. Good luck everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.